So this is the traditional old master underpainting, where you take your image and you do it in monochrome. And they generally used earth tones to do this. And then on top, the glaze layer, that's where the color was added in the glazing layer. So this is actually a copy of a detail of a Velázquez painting. But you can get the sense of how color can be applied in layers instead of directly out of the tube. And it creates a luminous effect because the light rays are actually shining through the clear glazing layers and then bouncing out again. So that's where you get a more luminous effect rather than the flat color. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So this is a chart that I do in my glazing workshops. We do one of these. We make the vertical stripes in solid tube color, right out of the tube, just nothing added, no glazing medium. That's the first stripes. And then on the top, we do the glaze of the transparent colors. Now, do you know about the transparent and opaque colors? Have you studied that? Okay, good. So you want to be using your transparent colors on top and opaque colors underneath. You don't have to use opaque underneath, but they did in this case create a solid field of color. So let's talk a little bit about how you mix a glaze and how you might apply it. So I'm going to just take this canvas here and I should have cleaned up my poor brushes before I got started. I don't have my very favorite glazing brush with me, but I'm going to use this soft bristle brush. This is I think it's Sable Synthetic is what it's called. It's a very soft brush, and that's what I like for glazing, for traditional glazing, because I was trained as an oil painter. So I did all my, many years of glazing with oil painting mediums, and they level really beautifully, no brush strokes. It's almost like a glass-like surface when you use an oil glaze. With acrylics, it's a little trickier getting it to level really smoothly and getting it on and finessing it before it dries. So I definitely recommend the softest brush you can find, and the way I do that is when I take the dry brush and run it over my wrist or something, it feels really, really soft, like a little kitten or something like that. It doesn't feel like a bunch of separate bristles, right? You don't want that because the separate bristles will create specific brush strokes. That's the purpose of those brushes. Those are for that more expressive textural brush stroke. This is for very soft, smooth, and you notice I used it for the blending to give it a softer look. So that's one tip. Now we're going to take some glazing medium, and glazing medium is designed to level again, just like I mentioned with the oil glazes, they level. The gloss medium, you can see this. Now I made this years ago, maybe 16 years ago, before they came out with a glazing medium, and I was using gloss medium, and if you look closely, I'll pass this out, you can see some brush strokes on there. And that's because it was the gloss medium. So that's the difference, is glazing medium is designed to level and become smooth, and the gloss medium will show the brush strokes more. So I generally, my technique is I use a generous amount of glazing medium. So you can see that there. And notice it's a little bit milky, translucent when it's wet. That's a very thick application. If you brush it out, it looks much more clear. But just know that it will dry 100% clear. And I have a disc of some medium so you can see that. So if I let this puddle just dry here on my palette, I would be able to peel it up and it would look like that, just a clear disc. Okay, so what color should I add? Anyone want to shout out? Green, okay, you got it. So I'm going to use a phthalo green, which is a transparent green. And phthalos are very, very strong tinting strength colors. So I'm going to add very little of this. What I do is I'll put a little drop of it there, like so. And then I'm going to use about 1/10 of that. So I call it a twitch of color. You can always add more, but you can't take it out. Have you found that when you're mixing your colors? You try to mix a color and then suddenly the whole thing is ruined. The whole pile of color is ruined. So I'm going to mix that in. You see just that little bit tinted it so strongly. And my technique for glazing, what I personally like to do in my painting, is to build up many, many layers of a color. So I tend to do very, very pale glazes and build up the color through the layers rather than doing one darker glaze. There's no right or wrong to it. You could make it tint it darker and just do one layer. In fact, for the purposes of the demonstration, I'm going to tint it darker because it'll show up a little better. All right, so you see it's kind of stringy. This is another instance where I have to mix it really well. Did you find that when you were mixing your glazes? You had to mix them really well so they didn't become streaky. It's tempting sometimes to want to do this with a brush because it's almost like using a whisk to beat eggs or something. It'll beat it up, but it also will make it frothy, and then the paint gets stuck in the ferrule of the brush, so you end up clogging up your brush faster. So if you can be a little more patient and mix it thoroughly with a knife, that's the best way to go about it. Okay, so now I'm going to show you, and sometimes I try and purposely do it poorly. In fact, we'll take a stiffer brush and we'll try and get brush strokes in it and watch, and you'll get to see how the brush strokes level. So I'm going to put a lot of on there, and I'm just going to brush that out on the canvas. And this is the proverbial watching paint dry. So I'm going to hold that, and it'll take a little while, but you'll start to see, like in the next 10 or maybe 20 seconds, it starts to change a little. I don't know if, can you notice a change yet? You seeing it at all with the brush stroke? Not yet. Okay, I can start to see it a little bit now, but I don't know if you can, if I hold it like that, can you see? What do you notice? Do you notice a change at all?
It's not as,
It's softer.
yeah.
Softer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the brush strokes aren't quite as prominent or visible. Now we'll do some better brush techniques. So this is sort of like really not trying, using not a good brush and just slapping it on there. But what I teach people to do is we load up the brush. I give it a very generous amount, and then I kind of layer it like so. So I'm going to brush it out, and then I'm using my soft brush, and I'm going to smooth it out. Unfortunately, this brush was really damp because it's better to use a dry brush because I can see the bristles are splitting a little bit and creating those lines. Can you see those lines in there? Anyway, that's because the brush was a little wet. I use a bone dry glazing brush when I do this, and it creates a really smooth texture. But the same thing here is if I just smooth it out, I'm going to actually be a little more generous since my brush is not helping me right now. You have to start traveling with an extra brush. And then I just let it rest like that. It will also level itself out, so it becomes a smoother texture over time. So we'll let that sit for a little bit. So any questions about glazing with acrylics? Any tips I can give you? Another approach is to do it very, very thin too. I know some people will do this type of very thin application of glaze. I think because I was trained with oil painting, I was used to doing a thick, more viscous glaze, but there's nothing wrong with just applying a really thin veil of color. And then it actually doesn't matter if you use gloss medium or glazing medium because there's nothing really to level at all. Now do you see how that's starting to level out already there? Okay. So you'll have to take my word for it. If I had a better brush, I'd get a really smooth application like you saw in my painting there. But since I don't, I'm just doing another technique, which is using the brush a little bit more dry. And that's some different little tips for glazing. The other thing about the glazing medium is it dries more slowly, so it gives you more time to finesse the edges. You know, say I was doing this face, right? I was actually blending a couple of colors right here at the cheeks to give that flesh to the cheek. I needed time while it was still wet to, you know, blend the areas into the other. If it had dried, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So if it dries too quickly, it's sort of like if you've painted your fingernails and you applied the second coat before the first was dry, then you end up pulling. Does that happen to anybody? It pulls it off. So it's the same kind of thing. Acrylics, there's that sweet spot when it's dry enough where you can put the next layer on. But you have to wait until you get there. Try not to be overzealous and put the next coat on until you know for sure you'll tap it that it's really, really nice and dry. So any questions about that?
Is it the same process with like really small details? Like changing colors really small?
Yes.
Small areas?
You mean like when I was talking about this area or
Yeah.
glazing the lips? Yes, the same process. You don't have to load the brush. I mean, I might just use in a small area like a little brush like that. Let's just say I was doing, you know, the lips, green lips. And I would just go in like that and just brush it like that. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you just need a smaller brush. Yeah. So, any other questions? And you see, as time goes, see this gets smoother and smoother. Can you tell the difference from when it started? So you know, if you're putting thick glazes, you're going to have to do it flat, not up at your easel. Because if I stand this up, that's going to start dripping. So you'll do, you know, it's easier to do a thick glaze layer when the painting is flat.
When you're glazing, we kind of talked about it in class, but if you want to lighten something, you're not supposed to have white, right? Like,
Oh, lighten the glaze.
yeah, like if you like say you messed up and you want to go back and like bring a highlight back. Like,
Oh, okay. So in general, now it's interesting, I'm thinking, and maybe this isn't what you're doing, let me see if I'm getting you correctly. So you've done something, it became too dark and you want to bring a highlight back.
yeah.
In general, what the old masters would do is they'd put the highlights at the very end and they just use white or whatever light mixture. It's not even a glaze.
Oh.
So yeah, if you look at like some, you know, Franz Halls or, you know, some of those, you know, portrait paintings, like the little, you know, highlights, it could be like lace on a collar or something in the eye or whatever. That would just be a dab of a thicker paint on top of the glaze layers. So that would be another step in the painting process. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because in general, it's pretty hard to make, you can't really make anything lighter by glazing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, if it's really an issue, sometimes people will actually have to sand back the painting, sand the glaze out, repaint the underpainting, and then put the glaze on top. And there is, you know, that's a painstaking process, but if you want to get it the way you want it, sometimes you have to go the extra mile. But it sounds like what you were talking about could just, like, pop a little highlight on the top.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good question, thank you. Any other questions about the glazing? Okay, we're good. So we're going to move